Thank you. My name is Emily Rabinowitz, and like you said, I'm a freshman at NYU. But the work I'm going to tell you about today was actually conducted when I was a junior and senior in high school. And I had the privilege of being mentored by Dr. Jenny Menon-Mariano, who's an associate professor at the University of South Florida. And what we started doing was we researched purpose, and we had the privilege of actually being in a high school because I was a teenager studying teenagers. And the question I started asking my peers was, what is the best thing that you want to do with your life? And of the 270 students that we surveyed, 60% gave responses that did not have a pro-social orientation. In other words, their responses were not oriented towards making the world a better place, towards actually doing something with their life. They were instead focused on things like getting a job, or making money, or winning an award, graduating college, graduating high school, being a superstar in arts and athletics. So for example, this is a student that did not have pro-social orientation. Instead, they're focused on having money and a career. And these are good goals, but they leave room for improvement beyond things that are superficial, like having money and a career. And in fact, researchers know that having a pro-social orientation in life is beneficial to life satisfaction, engagement, resilience, grit, and so many other positive factors in your life. In fact, this is an example of a pro-social response that we got, and this student is oriented towards making the world a better place by helping animals. But not only is this a pro-social response, but it's also a purposeful response, and that's the theme of this section. And purpose is an intention to accomplish something that is both beyond the self and society in which the individual lives. And it's currently lacking in young people today, as demonstrated by the statistics I gave you earlier. But we know that only 23% of high school seniors will graduate with a purpose. And these are the same young people that are going to go on and make critical decisions in education, jobs, careers, and relationships. And of the 60% of students who will manage to graduate college, only 42% of them will have a purpose when they go into the real world. So our system to educate and inspire our young people to live a meaningful and impactful life is failing. We are letting people enter the world with a lack of clarity and mission in their lives, leading to decreased productivity and engagement in the workplace. Specifically, a 2008 Gallup poll found that the United States wastes $300 billion annually due to decreased productivity because of lack of engagement in the American workplace. $300 billion. And people who are purposeful are more likely to bring that purpose into their workplace and decrease that $300 billion. My solution to this epidemic, or this phenomena of purpose, is integrating it with a theory called SOC, which stands for Selection, Optimization, and Compensation. And for the first time, there's a theory that actually looks at how individuals themselves can develop their own purposes. And it can be as simple as a daily diary or a conversation. But the key part about this theory is that it requires the individual to have the self-reflection and the introspection to understand what SOC processes are at work and how they want to use them going forward in the future. So before I begin, I want to go over some of the measures that we talk about when we're looking at purpose, because it's really important to understand what's behind the statistics that you're looking at. And this is the same question that you saw before, and it's inspired by the Life Aspirations Questionnaire. And this was the first time that this was actually used, and we measured it with high school students, and this question basically assessed what is purpose and does it exist. Then we asked students, why do you want to do this thing? Why do you have this purpose? And this was whether or not that pro-social ambition exists or not. And even when we asked students at this detail, we found that they still had a deficit in pro-social behavior and thinking patterns. They still were not oriented towards making the world a better place for the right reasons. And then we asked students, what are you doing right now to accomplish your goal? Can you actually identify something concrete in school or in work or at home? And we still found a decreased amount. And then we asked them, what future plans do you have? And could you actually see yourself working in this purposeful field? And we also asked them, what is their compensation? What were they doing to actually help when something bad happened? But it's important that I note here that, like I said, this was the first time we actually used these measures. They were developed by my advisor and me. They were used for the first time on a SurveyMonkey online module. They were used for the first time alongside SOC measures in this population. So there are some important caveats when we're looking at qualitative measures like this. And the first is that students only had 50 words to respond to a question like, what is the best thing you want to do with your life? It's hard for all of us to answer, let alone on a computer setting. So when we were trying to quantify this into numbers, we had difficulty with reliability. And it's also important to note that before we can even take these statistics seriously, we have to know that there are better methods out there. Most purpose methods are interviews, and they take like 45 minutes to complete, and they're expensive, and they're long. And doing a survey is easier, but you take some risks. So that's important to note. But there are still very valuable lessons that we can take away from the research that I've done and the experience that I have working with students, teachers, researchers, and being a teenager going through this purpose process. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to go through each of the 3 SOC processes, and we're going to look at what they actually could be like in your life. And the first is selection. And Echoing Green is an organization that works in purposeful fields. And they've defined selection as a process of choosing your purposeful goal with your heart or your head. And your heart is what you care about, what you're passionate about, and you can't stop talking about it, and it's just amazing, and you're so loving it. And then your head is what comes naturally to you, what you just do well in class, or maybe it's really easy and you understand it. And the way that you can make decisions is by using both of these sets of understandings about yourself. So I like to give examples about how this actually works. But before I go into that, I want to just note that purpose and selecting your purpose is not just a once-in-a-lifetime decision. It's a constantly evolving process, and that's why the little decisions about your goals that you make are very important. And for example, one of those goals that we all make is choosing our courses, which I know a lot of us just did, and it was really overwhelming because there were a lot of courses in Albert, and there were a lot of courses that we had to take. And so part of what we have to do is we have to make a goal hierarchy about what's important to us. And how do we make decisions about, do I want to learn this skill this semester or next semester? Do I want to take it with this professor or that one? What is important? What am I going to succeed in? And this idea of being able to place your goals in relevance to each other is a part of selection. The next skill that selection also utilizes is future orientation, which is the ability to actually see yourself using the skills that you're learning in those courses. And it can be as simple as reflecting during or after your course and being, this is what I learned, this is what I still need to improve, or making goals for yourself before. How am I actually going to use statistics for behavioral sciences? It's really hard. Or how am I actually going to use writing the essay? I hate it so much. But being able to identify, even if it's just one little thing of, oh, I learned that MLA or APA works this way, or I learned that I can actually talk to my professor or go to the writing center. These are skills that I can see myself using in the future, and that makes your current activity more meaningful. And the third skill that selection offers is mastery orientation. And compared to performance orientation, mastery orientation is actually learning something so that you can integrate it into your skill set for the future. Performance orientation is learning something so that you can pass the test or pass the class. And for me, this was statistics. I absolutely hate math, but I had to take it, and I really didn't want to learn it, but then I went on job interviews and they kept asking me about my statistical or computational knowledge. And I realized that it's a waste to take a $3,000 class here and not actually integrate something into my skill set. And I would be wasting my time, my money, my brain cells if I couldn't integrate it and look for a bigger idea or purpose to what I was learning. So now we're going to look at optimization, which is utilizing new resources in order to accomplish the bigger overarching goal that you had decided, or the little goals like getting an A in class or making new friends. And the example that I like to use for optimization is your first internship or your first job. And a lot of students say that it's pretty demeaning to be in your first job because sometimes they give you really boring things. And a good example is like entering in data points in a data set. And one skill that optimization requires is flow. And flow is the ability to catalyze on your skill level and your challenge. And when your challenges perfectly meet your skills, you're able to enter in the state of enjoyment, engagement, and timelessness. It's like when you're working and you don't realize you've been writing or doing math for like an hour, and you're like, oh my gosh, I've just like finished all my homework. It's great. It's It's like the goal. Anyways, so the idea with flow is to find something that your challenges and your skills are really engaged with. And so the example, again, with this internship where you have to like input numbers is, are you interested in something? And for some students, it might be, maybe you're really interested in how to make that database in the first place, or maybe it was how you made the survey method, or maybe it's when you're engaging with participants in the study. Whatever it was, you have to be able to identify that, look for whatever you can do to build yourself into a new role, and identify more challenges to engage yourself further with that thing that you're interested in. And suddenly, entering the numbers doesn't seem that boring because you're engaged in this bigger idea that you're actually interested in. The next thing we have is new skills, and this is something that a lot of people don't like to do, and it makes sense because when we're applying for new jobs, we want to actually tell the employer, I can do this for you, and I know how to do it, and that's me. But actually, employers enjoy it when people come in and say, I really want to learn this skill. I can bring these skills to you, and then I can take this away from you and become a better person engaged with my workplace. So that's part of optimization, is being open to advancing yourself into the new career or the new setting that you set. And finally, we have persistence, which is the ability to endure and to push on even though there's something difficult. So again, if it's really boring for us to just enter into numbers, but be able to see that there is something bigger than ourselves in this internship that we're doing, in this study that we're conducting, and that we can just get beyond the boredom that we might be feeling. And finally, we have compensation, which is being able to compensate or to make up for losses and decreases in our resources around us. And the example that I use for compensation is when you have to move to a new place, like I know most of us in college do, or you might end up doing sometime later or earlier in your life. And the problem with this is that all of a sudden, all the resources and the people and the things that you once knew, they aren't there anymore. And that's where resilience comes in, because you can't just push through. There's literally a wall or a barrier in front of you, and resilience is the ability to bounce back or to jump over or to get through that wall somehow. And so the example in college is you see your professors a lot less than you do in high school. And how do you make meaningful relationships? Because these are the people that are going to write you your job recommendations for the future. And that's really important. And resilience means that you're able to persist and continue to engage with them by going to their office hours or going to events or emailing them or doing something and pushing through the idea that there's this barrier of not having enough time and face time. The second skill that compensation gives us is loss-based selection. And if you're anything like me, you joined a million clubs when you first entered NYU or college or like anywhere. And we realize that there's not enough time for all the things that we join. So we have to then make decisions about what we want. And this is what happens when we don't have enough time, we don't get admitted into something, we select new goals that are around us about how we're going to proceed. And finally, we have the rearrangement of goals. And in my experience, this is something that people absolutely hate to do, because once upon a time, we had this amazing goal and this purposeful, pro-social, positive thing that we wanted to do, and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, it's no longer available to us. My example was I wanted to be in the pre-med track when I first came here. And then I had a meeting with my advisor, and he said that if I wanted to do that, it would take like 2 extra years to graduate. I don't have the time, the money, or the extra years to graduate to do a pre-med track. So I had to rearrange my goals, and I had to do some really serious thought and experience and optimization and thinking about whether or not that was an important goal and how I could compensate for the loss of not having that degree or those classes on my resume. And that's an important part of compensation and life in general. So what we've gone through so far is each of the 3 processes of SOC. And I emphasize that because they're not steps. They're not things that you can just be like, okay, I've done selection for the week and I no longer have to do it again. It's something that constantly interchanges, and they always are very connected, and they're parts of a process, and just like purpose is part of a process. And what I've given you today might seem like things that are pretty common sense, and you might have done them before and maybe never realized it. But what you've probably never done before is use this framework, this language or toolbox of a sort, to have a conversation with a friend, a guardian, a parent, an advisor, and talk about the goals that you're setting for yourself, or the ideas that you have, the feelings that you have, or whatever's going on. And this has never been studied in a school or an environment of any sort. But I think that each of you in this room has the opportunity to do your own little pilot study. And what does it mean to sit down with your friends and talk about, how am I using the SOC to do my goals? Am I feeling flow right now? Do I actually have my heart in this, or is it only my head? Or what process do I need to be using? And asking yourself these questions is really useful, because sometimes it's hard to articulate what we feel about our future, what we feel about the present moment. And the SOC theory offers a new framework and a common language. So I leave you today with a question that I asked high schoolers: what is the best thing you want to do with your life? It's a question that's important to ask yourself, and it's a question that even I don't really know the answer to. But it's also a question that can thread through your entire life. And that's the thing about purpose. It's not static. It moves and it changes and it evolves. But the function of purpose is that it evolves positively, that it changes with your strengths and your assets and your interests and the challenges that you face. So I challenge you today to use the SOC language and framework and thought process in order to select purposeful goals, optimize your resources around you, and compensate for losses in order to make a better place for you in the world around you. Thank you.